I want you to imagine a scale with good snowboarding at that end and bad snowboarding at this end. And on that scale, you'd probably put skidded turns at the bad end and carved turns at the good end. And well, yes, you'd be right. But that can lead to a misconception that good snowboarding would eventually have you carving down every piece on the mountain regardless of the conditions in front of you. Whereas a better definition or a better picture of a good snowboarder is somebody who can adjust their turn size and shape to match the conditions in front of them, giving them the most amount of grip and the least amount of skid possible. And whilst a carved turn definitely fits in to that definition of good snowboarding, it's not always the right turn for all conditions. And that is where gripped turns come in. So in today's video, I'm going to explain the difference between carved, skidded and gripped, when to use them, and also stick around to the end where I'll give you a quick drill that will take you from skidded to gripped turns. Let's go. So let's start with skidded turns. Now in a skid, the board is going completely sideways, as in the nose of my board is pointing this way, but I'm going that way. Now, these are usually done unintentionally, and it's a sign that you've got something wrong. That could be counter-rotating at the edge change to kick the back end out, or it could just be not enough edge angle at the end of the turn, resulting in a loss of grip. Whatever it is, if you're skidding, it likely means you need to work on your technique. And I'll put loads of videos for proper technique down in the description below. But there are also a couple of occasions when skidding can be called for. It could be a quick speed check in the run into a box, or a quick skid to slow down as someone cuts in front of you. Moving on to carved turns. This is a turn with no skid at all. I'm constantly following the nose of my board throughout the turn. And carved turns should be the goal for any mellow slope or even a steeper piece with grippy conditions. But because a carved turn is quite a big turn, I spend quite a bit of time here with the board in the full line, pointing down the slope, picking up speed. And if you try and take these turns to a slightly steeper or perhaps an icy piste, you might not be able to deal with the build-up of pressure that speed brings to the end of the turn, and you end up right back here skidding. And yes, there are things that you can do to make carved turns smaller. You can increase the edge angle, or you can make different movements at the edge change. You could do a down unweighted or a retraction turn. You can see the video description down below for info on those things. And they will allow you to push more pressure against the board, push it into reverse camber that will further tighten up the arc of a carved turn. But doing those things requires you to have decent snow that will allow you to put the board on a higher edge angle and really apply pressure against it. I've just been trying to do some in this slushy conditions, and I'm just really breaking through the slush. I can't show it to you in these conditions. So, we find ourselves at a point, which exactly is where I was at on these slushy conditions and bumpy conditions of this piste, where we don't want to carve, but we don't want to go full skid either. And that is where gripped turns come in. They introduce a small amount of skid throughout the turn that allows you to better manage pressure, meaning that by the end of the turn, the board is gripping, it's traveling in the same direction as the nose of the board and leaving a thin line across the slope. And because these grip turns also introduce a small amount of skid, it allows you to turn the nose of the board in just ahead of the tail of the board, allowing you to achieve turns that are smaller than what you'd be able to achieve in any carved turn. It's by leading in with the front knee and hip over the board, here and again here, that I'm able to rotate the nose of the board into the turn just ahead of the tail. Now this does leave a slightly wider track than a true carved turn, as you can see behind me, but I'm still leaving that S shape in the snow, and it's that allows me to carry my momentum across the slope at the end of the turn. And despite a small amount of skid throughout the turn, which is caused by that nose rotating into the turn just ahead of the tail, by the time my board has completed the arc of the turn, the tail is back following the nose and I'm achieving grip and traveling across the slope right there, leaving a thin line. And it's at the end of the turn right there that you can tell if you're snowboarding well or not, because the one thing that skidded and grip turns have in common is that by the time the board has completed the arc of the turn, and by the time the board is pointing across the slope, you are also traveling across the slope following the nose of the board. Whereas in a skidded turn, the board comes round the arc of the turn, it completes the turn, yet you're still going backwards, not in the direction of the board, or skidding forward if you're on the heel edge. Cool. So, by the way guys, I just want to add in, because I get a lot of questions about what cameras I'm using and where is the stick that I'm holding on to. I'm using the Insta360 X3 camera. I'll put a link to it down below, and you can also check out my video review that I made of this camera a couple of months back. But now, let's get on to that drill that will take you from skidded to gripped turns. So let's begin this drill in a skid, sliding sideways down the slope before bringing the board to a stop. To bring the board to the stop, you want to have equal weight through both feet, and you want to have your hips properly stacked over the edge of your board. Now I want you to point the board down the slope and make an edge change before doing the same thing on your toe side. Now this is the part where it's easy to spot bad habits. Are you able to go from this position, point the board down the slope and make an edge change without swinging your shoulders around like crazy? So all I'm going to do is pass my front knee, my front hip over the board, followed by the back knee and the back hip, before bringing the board back down to a stop on my toe edge, hips forward, stacked vertically over my toes, equal pressure going down through both knees. Now, you'll be able to do this. Even if you find yourself making lots of skidded turns when you're riding, you'll be able to do this to bring the board to a stop. And what we're doing there is achieving grip. That's the grip at the end of each turn. And if you're able to do this, like I mentioned, without flailing your arms around like crazy, it means that you're doing something right. So remember those movements, and now we're going to take them on to step number 2. The only thing we change here is that we start with the board in a slight traverse, now going across the slope. I have the same posture I had before when I was in a stop, and then I make the same movements to bring the board around. And rather than stopping, same posture here, but now I'm traveling, I'm gripping across the slope on my toe side. Okay? By adding in this traverse, it allows me to pull the board around the arc of the turn. It's the arc of the turn which allows me to carry my momentum back across the slope, and it's that which will stop me skidding at the end of the turn. So, skidded to gripped turns done. Oh, went a little bit Gordon Ramsay there. But it is quite simple. Now, you might not be able to move through that drill as quick as I just did, but as I mentioned before, I'm going to put loads of videos down below that run through all the necessary technique that you need to do that. I've got videos on good posture, I've got videos that go through all the movements you need to make for the perfect short gripped turn. And I've got videos covering things like the retraction turns and the down unweighted turns that I mentioned earlier. So give those a watch, but I hope this video helps. And I just wanted to make it to really help clarify what good snowboarding is and the difference between skidded, gripped, and carved turns, and when you should be doing each one of them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.